Well, I did expect this to go 5 games, so that wasn't surprising to me, but how we got to game 5 and then the outcome of game 5 were both a lot more surprising to me. The Brewers, for the first time since 2018, have won a postseason series, and as well for the first time since 2018, they will play in the National League Championship Series. The Brewers beating the Cubs in 5 games, and a lot of ups and downs along the way. We'll kind of talk about how this series played out according to our expectations, or maybe against some of our expectations. But before we jump into all of that on this week's episode of the Brewer Fanatic podcast, I need to ask my co-host Spencer Michaelis, one day after the victory, that's when we're recording this, one day after the victory, how are you feeling?
Well, there's a wide range of answers I'm going to give you quickly here. One, I've been sick for like 4 days now, so not good in that regard. Two, the Brewers won in Game 5 against the Cubs, so fantastic in that regard. And then because the Brewers won in 5 games against the Cubs, I got about 2 or 3 hours of sleep last night, just full on adrenaline rush, I think, going on after the game, and I just could not fall asleep. So I'm very tired as well, and I have to be up for, work at 8 in the morning, and we're recording this at 10:30 p.m. at the moment. So I'm going to find the voice and the energy to get through it because I am very, very happy about the outcome of the series.
I can sympathize with the lack of sleep. I'm pretty wiped right now. I think I got 4 hours last night, so that's double what you got somehow. Um, but yeah, I was at the ballpark late, obviously, for the celebration. I got home at like 3, fell asleep at maybe quarter to 4, and then I had to get up for a morning tea time. So didn't get a whole lot of sleep. It's been a long day so far. It's been a long week and a half here, basically, just a complete whirlwind. But a lot of fun. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love the fact that I get to do this job and to cover this playoff run so far. It's been really awesome. And what's great about the playoffs is the added intensity and the added magnitude of every single pitch, every single play, every single moment. I think that makes it really, really fun to cover as a beat writer, especially because as the regular season wears on, you kind of get locked into this mode of what actually matters because it's 162. There's so many moments throughout the season. Like, it's just a different kind of coverage that I think you have to do during that time of the year because you can't get caught up in individual moments because it's a long baseball season. All this stuff happens, and I try not to cover things that I don't think actually matter that much. So I'm not going to pretend they matter and write about them. But this is awesome because every single moment and every single game too, there's way more to break down, turning points that you can break down, all this kind of stuff. And this has also just been very good baseball to watch. This was a good series against 2 very good teams. So it was awesome to be there for all 5 games. I went down to Wrigley. There was a lot of travel with that. I drove back and forth every night from the 2 nights that they played at Wrigley Field. But yeah, it's been draining over these last few days. But the fact that it's been so much fun and so exciting to cover makes it really, really easy to keep going, no matter how tired you might be. But yeah, a big week for the Milwaukee Brewers, a big week for the city of Milwaukee as well, to see the Brewers finally kind of get that monkey off their backs. I touched on it when we introduced the episode. We made our predictions for this series on our last full length episode, and you predicted that the Brewers would come out on top. Optimist that you are. Good job. You were right. Congratulations. I said Cubs in 5. But I think we both agreed that this is going to be very back and forth almost every single night, like tight games every night, a lot of just kind of trading blows. And for the most part, it really wasn't that. It was basically the first 4 games of the series, the home team just had seemingly total control over the visiting team. So the Brewers had really convincing wins in game 1 and game 2. I guess game 3, you could make the case that, the Cubs did kinda hang on for dear life in that one, but at the same time, even though it was a one-run game, it never really felt like the Brewers were actually going to get back into that one because it just felt like the Brewers were playing catch up the entire time and they didn't have the same energy. And we could talk about that when we get into game 3 a little more closely. But then in game 4, the Cubs had a convincing shutout win over the Brewers. And then in game 5, that was one where it was a little bit tighter. But again, the Brewers just seemed like they were in total control the entire time. So, we got to game 5, like I said. I was not shocked that it went to game 5. That's what I was expecting. I was not expecting that for a good chunk of the series, it was going to be these two teams trading positions of basically dominating the other one. I thought it was going to be a lot closer, like play to play, game to game than it was, but a very good series nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, all the trading of blows happened in the first inning, and then whoever left the first inning with the lead pretty much won the game. Like that was pretty much the only time it was back and forth at any point. So, um, definitely did not go exactly how I expected it to go, but my prediction, like you said, Brewers in 5, definitely wasn't optimistic or me being a homer. Nope, not whatsoever. It was all based on fact and analytics, and I nailed it. So what can I say? I'm a genius. No, but it was definitely optimistic, and I mean, I believed it was very possible, but yeah, it was very nice to see it come through, and like you said, it just did not happen in the way I would have expected it to. But you know what? You got to win 3 out of 5 games. It doesn't matter how you do it.
Let's dive into each of those 5 games here. We'll start with game 1 of the NLDS. The Brewers defeating the Cubs 9-3. And like we talked about, these first several games here of the series, it was basically trading blows in the first inning, and whoever got out of the first inning with the lead really never seemed like they were in grave danger of giving it away. So in game 1, Michael Busch led off with a solo homer off Freddie Peralta. And then the Brewers put up a 6 spot in the bottom of the first, and the game was basically over already at that point. Jackson Churio, Bryce Terang, William Contreras leading off with 3 straight doubles against Cubs starter Matthew Boyd. And then Sal Frelick hit a grounder to Nico Horner. He made a misplay that kept the inning going. It scored Contreras. And it, I believe, I don't have the box score in front of me right now, the Brewers scored 6 runs in that inning, and 4 of them, I think, were unearned. Or was it 2 of
Yeah,
them were unearned? It was 4?
4 were. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because of that error. And then Blake Perkins had an 11-pitch battle that ended with an RBI single. That's what knocked Matthew Boyd out of the game in the first inning. And then Jackson Churio recording his second hit of the inning, a 2-run single. There was a hamstring scare for Churio in this game. He would leave in his third at bat, which came in the second inning already, with a minor hamstring injury. He would continue playing through that for the rest of the series. The Brewers then adding 3 more in the second inning. Contreras, Christian Yelich, and Andrew Vaughn singling to load the bases. Caleb Durbin hit a 2-run bloop single. And then, like I mentioned, it was that infield hit from Jackson Churio. It did drive in a run, but he would leave the game. Did end up playing in every game of the series, however. Freddie Peralta, meanwhile, he settled in nicely after that leadoff homer, 5 2/3, 4 hits, 2 earned runs, gave up another solo homer, but really no harm there. 3 walks, 9 Ks, tying the Brewers' playoff record for a pitcher in an outing in the postseason. Aaron Ashby, an inning and a third scoreless, struck out a guy. Jared Koenig did give up a home run in his inning of work, and then Nick Mears taking this one home with a pretty comfortable 6-run lead. Game 2, well, actually, before we move on to game 2, the one thing I do want to take away from this game, on the offensive side, how aggressive the Brewers were against Matthew Boyd. Going into this game, Craig Counsell was kind of asked about their offensive approach, and his response was, they don't swing because Pat Murphy tells them not to swing. And the Brewers came out swinging in game 1 immediately right out of the gates. Those 3 straight doubles as well were on 3 straight pitches. So they were not fooling around. They knew they were facing a guy in Matt Boyd who filled up the strike zone more than anybody in baseball on a rate basis this year, and a guy who had one of the lowest walk rates in baseball as well. So they knew what they were going to get. They were prepared, and they got the job done. It was really, really impressive offensive approach, especially early in this one.
Yeah, it was a surprise to me sitting in the bleachers, just seeing them attack, attack, attack. I mean, the three doubles happened so fast. Like it was just you go down 1-0. Churio leads off with the double. Ooh, nice. Okay. Guy scoring position. Oh, Terang doubled. And then right away, Contreras doubles. Like, oh, it's 2-1. The Brewers have three doubles, nobody out. I think the other thing to mention is that we talked so much about the Cubs defense. And then in game one, in the first inning, arguably their best defender, at least up there with PCA, immediately makes a routine error to end up scoring a run. And I think, of course, that was one of those things that, we say all this stuff, there's all this data, but when you get in the playoffs in small samples, things can happen that go against what you've seen all season. And yeah, that was maybe the more surprising part, even beyond the Brewers being so aggressive, was seeing Nico Horner boot what was really a pretty easy play. Now, it would have been probably a close play on Frelick, just given the speed of the ball and how it was hit. But I think it would have been an out, obviously, and ending up scoring a run and kind of extending the inning and all of that. And it really ended up putting the game away for the Brewers, like you said, with the 6-1 lead. So, yeah, it was interesting to see them come out really aggressively, especially with the comment pregame. And Craig Counsell was absolutely correct. The Brewers do not swing a lot. This is, I think Murph even got a little surprised when he got asked about it. Like, people always say we don't swing. It's like, yeah, you don't. The Brewers
You
don't
don't, like,
swing that much.
statistically, you do not swing. You swing less than every other team in baseball.
Yeah, there are numbers that back this up. So this is not something that he was making up, or it wasn't even at all meant as a shot at the Brewers. It was just something that was true heading into it. And I do think, and we could talk about it throughout the rest of the episode and maybe even in the preview and stuff of the NLCS, but I do think one thing that we probably should have mentioned coming into the playoffs is that there's actually, I think, quite a bit of value to teams bucking trends of theirs throughout the regular season in the postseason, because teams are really prepping for what you've done all year and how you do things, and having the ability to kind of change that and go against some of the things. And it's not like you can change everything about what you do. You have to be true to who you are, but stuff like that, where teams are going to go, okay, this team's not going to swing first pitch very often. We can get ahead. We can go attack them with a fastball and then get into a pitcher's count because they don't swing. And then you go in and all of a sudden you start swinging and roping balls in gaps because you're being aggressive like that. That catches a team off guard because it's not what they prepared for. So I think there's a lot of value to the Brewers doing stuff like that, but Counsell was not wrong. And it was something that went very much against what they've done all season.
There's a couple other things from this series that we can kind of come back to on that point.
Yeah.
For now, game two, Brewers winning this one by a final of 7-3 after a 9-3 victory in game one. So Aaron Ashby pitched as the starter, kind of getting things rolling here for what was expected to be a bullpen game in game two. And it did not go super well for him. He gave up a 3-run home run to Seiya Suzuki on, I believe it was a high changeup. It was originally tagged by StatCast as a fastball. I don't know. Everything about it said changeup, except it had like 11 vert, which I think is why StatCast marked it as a fastball. I don't know if that ended up being a misread, but it was changeup velo, changeup spin.
Yeah.
But the shape was kind of weird. But again, if he left it at the top and he just maybe didn't get on top of that ball the way that he's supposed to, that can explain, number one, why the location was so bad, and number two, why it maybe had more carry than it was supposed to. But nonetheless, it was a mistake, and Seiya Suzuki made him pay. He did not throw any breaking balls in the inning until after the home run. And did we talk about in the preview episode about how the Cubs crush fastballs? I
We
can't
did.
remember if we went over that. We did?
Yep.
Okay. And that was always going to be an interesting storyline because the Brewers throw a lot of fastballs. And for the most part, we can kind of break it down as we keep going because there's another example later in the series, but it was very case by case whether they followed that trend or whether they bucked it. And Ashby, for the most part, they kept on a very fastball heavy or sinker heavy mix, even though he's got two really good breaking pitches. And like I said, no breaking balls until after that home run by Suzuki. That does bring us to our first question. Ben asks, you were understandably critical of Contreras' game calling early in the year. How would you assess it now, given their success in the second half and how he navigated all of the pitching changes throughout the DS. Spencer, do you want to start with your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so it is tough because that is a lot to handle. Like multiple bullpen games, a lot of arms coming in and out. So he does have a lot on his plate. Absolutely does. But I still struggled with some of what was happening throughout the series. This Ashby game is easily the number one for me. Like Aaron Ashby's best pitch is his curveball. It's not all that close. He has good pitches. Don't get me wrong. It's not like but that curveball is really, really good. And it also just sets up all the other stuff to play off of it well. And to not use it at all. And it's not like Ashby's a starter who's trying to go 2 or 3 times through the order. And it's like, okay, we got to maybe not show them everything the first time through here. And we're going to be selective. And in the playoffs, I'm not ever doing that anyway. Frankly, I'm not a huge believer in that in general, but in the playoffs, especially, like give them everything you got while you're out there. And if you get to the end of the line, then you get to the end of the line and you make a change. But especially for a guy who, I mean, what was he going? I think they said 3 would be the max. I really doubt that was going to happen. I think 2 was probably what I was thinking. My guess was they were going to try and get through Turner twice. So that they wouldn't see Bush in that spot when they were likely going to bring in a guy like Mears, who that's not a great matchup. You don't really want Nick Mears against a Michael Bush in that type of spot. So that was kind of what I was anticipating. I guess that could have got you into the 3rd inning, but that's in a really, really good scenario. So for me in this game, like you're not saving anything. Go give them what you have, and leaving out your best pitch is not how I would go attack hitters at any point. Especially because he did face like a guy like Tucker in that inning, and you've got a lefty in there, and it's not a pitch that has to be righty lefty either. The slider, maybe you keep away from righties, but the curveball can play just fine against lefties and righties. So didn't agree with the Ashby stuff. I don't want to get too much into all of the other stuff necessarily, because I do think we can kind of cover it as we go through some of those games if we come across anything that we specifically want to highlight. But I thought it was fine. There's one example that we'll get to that I thought he did a great job of adjusting and going to a different mix and changing things up. And he did stuff like that. I think he, in general, I mean, it's hard to argue with every result outside of the first inning of these games. Like whenever the bullpen came in, things went quite well for the Brewers. And I think a lot of it is at least due in part to Contreras having a good hold on what they need to do and how they do it and what they do well and going to it in the right spot. So I thought he did a fine job. I think there's still things that I disagree with, just the way he generally attacks it. We've talked about that a lot. But I mean, for the most part, there weren't a ton of things I wanted to nitpick throughout the series. And game 3, there's no, I think it's game 4. Game 4, there's one that I would really,
I
would
think I know
nitpick,
exactly which one you're talking about, because I was going to bring it up myself anyway. But yeah, I mean, yeah, Ashby should have thrown more breaking stuff, but at the same time, I don't know if that's directly responsible for the runs he gave up, because
No,
again,
yeah.
it was a changeup, like the absolutely horrific changeup, a
Yes.
very bad pitch,
Probably the worst of
and
his career.
you cannot blame the catcher if a guy does not remotely come close to executing the pitch. That's not how this works. The times when you can say, "Hey, what was that pitch call?" is when you're following along with the sequence, and based on what you think about where the guy's timing is at, kind of where he's caught with what he's looking for and how he's timing up pitches, how he's seeing the ball, what you know about his tendencies, what you know about your pitcher's tendencies and your pitcher's strengths, all this stuff. If there's something that just doesn't seem to take advantage of all of those things in the proper way, that's when you can be, or that's at least when I'm more critical of it. And also, like, I think you see that more when you do that and the guy does at least throw the ball close to where it's supposed to
Yes.
be, and it doesn't work. We've also talked about this before. I think that sequencing matters quite a bit more. As long as you're not throwing a pitch like right down the middle or right in a guy's wheelhouse, I think in a lot of instances, sequencing matters more than location, because big league pitchers don't actually hit their spots perfectly ever, hardly. So we've talked about before. I think having the right sequence and messing with timing that way is actually a lot more impactful. But yeah, I would largely agree with you. It was basically I could count probably on one hand the calls that I didn't like, and if you can only count on one hand the calls you didn't like out of a 5-game series, it's probably not that big of a deal. But some of it does come back to like some of the trends that we've talked about. Like I think sticks with the fastball too much when he shouldn't. I think that's still the biggest one. Um, or it seems like he goes in sometimes with kind of a preconceived notion about a pitch, and I think sometimes he can be a little stubborn with getting off of that pitch, even though you can tell like guys are on it with their swings or the way the sequence is playing out, like the guy is going to be on time for that. Um, but by and large, I think it is hard to be super critical of anything overall with how he navigated this. And I do think he did a good job of kind of keeping certain guys' emotions in check or helping them use their emotions the right way. I think that's something you don't see as much. That seems to me like it's his biggest strength, and I wonder if that's why so many of the pitchers speak highly of him.
Yeah, I mean, doing the stuff like firing the ball back to a guy when they're kind of losing command sometimes. I think for some guys that's kind of a like, hey, time to lock in. It's just a quick reminder, like, hey, focus on me. Don't worry about other stuff. Like, we're all right, but it's time to lock in. And I thought some of the mound visit timing, even there were times where I was like, man, I think he needs to go out there, and he would go out there and talk to him. Like that type of stuff. It does matter. That's a big part of the game. And um, I'm not we won't get into announcers on TV, but I wasn't a huge fan of any of the commentary I heard watching playoff games this entire DS timing wise. But I did think one of the fun things to listen to with Adam Wainwright and AJ Pierzynski was kind of that type of talk. I thought they had some good conversations about like, hey, I think this guy could probably use, um, a little pep talk here, or this might be a good time to go talk through something else just to get his mind. Like they were talking through some of those scenarios, like, hey, this would be a good time when I'd call the catcher out, or the catcher as the catcher, I'd go out there. Um, and I thought William did a really good job of that in the series. So I agree. I think some of that stuff a little harder to recognize, even harder to quantify than pitch calling is, but I did think he did a good job with some of that stuff.
So Ashby did put the Brewers in an early hole, but for the second straight game, they would come back pretty strongly in the bottom half of the first. William Contreras and Christian Yelich hitting 2-out singles, and then Andrew Vaughn with a big 3-run homer to tie it. Contreras then homered in the third to give the Brewers the lead, and then Jackson Chourio providing some insurance with a 3-run homer off a 100-mile-an-hour Danny Palencia fastball that he was right on and hit to center field. Meanwhile, the bullpen game worked very, very well behind Aaron Ashby. Nick Mears finished up the second inning, and then we found out that Jacob Mizorowski turns out was always intended to be the main attraction of this playoff, or not of this playoff series. He kind of did end up being the main attraction, but of this game and this pitching plan. 3 innings for him, just 1 hit allowed. Did walk a couple, but struck out 4, and he came out of the gates throwing 104 miles an hour, pumped up from that playoff adrenaline. Spencer, we talked about Miz a lot when we were projecting the rosters going into this series, and really just about how the argument for putting him on the playoff roster is the stuff is just too good. The upside is just too high.
Yeah.
And in October, you got to go down with your best stuff guys. And neither of us had Grant Anderson on our roster, but even that one is kind of similar. Like, yes, he doesn't have the Miz kind of stuff, but he gets a lot of swing and miss compared to like a DL Hall or Tobias Myers. You need guys who have the capability to have those higher upside outings when you need some big outs. So I think the Brewers deserve a lot of credit for putting him on the roster. I wanted him on the roster. I had him on my roster. And I had even said before, maybe I don't remember if it was on this show, but I would have started him before starting, say, Jose Quintana in a playoff game, just because I think you needed to trust that stuff. And the Brewers did, and he ended up playing a very big role, not only in this one, but later in the series as well. And I think even in this outing, like, yes, he did walk two guys, but I think it shows that the bar, especially in a role where you're only asking him to go 3 or 4, he does not need to be crazy efficient. He doesn't even need to throw a ton of strikes, but you could see the entirety of this outing, everything that he threw in the strike zone or close to it, either they were hopelessly late on it or it was a incredibly uncomfortable swing, weak contact, and a lot of uncomfortable takes too. Like the Cubs did not come remotely close to getting a barrel on him throughout the entirety of these 3 innings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when we discussed it, I did say, like, if it was my choice, I would put certainly glad that they did not go that route and that you were correct because, like you said, I mean, he ended up being maybe the biggest story. And as Matt Arnold said, like you could make the argument if there was an MVP for the NLDS that he may have deserved it. I mean, 2 games that he ate the bulk innings in, and this one he came out with stuff. I mean, as good as we've seen it from a guy who has as good a stuff as anybody. Um, and yeah, he was around the zone enough, the 2 walks, but he was in and around the zone with stuff that's you got to start your bat early for. So it gives you a little more room for error and it gives you a little more room to be around the edges and maybe not necessarily in the zone. And he was landing the slider in the zone enough to make him think about that fastball on the outside corner a little off, that they have to go after it because, that could end up being a 97 mile per hour slider that catches the outside corner. Like, he did a lot of really good things in this one. I think it was really nice to see him, his first inning, he gets a shutdown, good, clean inning. He had a base runner, but he gets out of the inning and he gets a comebacker back to him. He takes it himself to first, which I knew in the moment before he said after the game, I'm like, he absolutely was afraid to toss that thing or throw it at all to first, which makes plenty of sense. Not a problem at all. Glad he had the wherewithal to just say, hey, I'm just going to go take it. I got plenty of time. And then he gets really fired up after recording the out. And seeing that, I wondered if they were like telling him, hey, you got an inning here, go take it. And then when that wasn't the case, I was a little concerned, like, oh boy, did he just kind of let everything out? Did he just air it all out, then get all his energy out and get too pumped up about 1 inning? But he didn't. He settled right back in, had 2 more clean innings. And I mean, that's the type of stuff we talked about, especially early in his career this year, that's more mature than what you maybe were expecting coming in. And given how some of the stuff went down the stretch of the season, like, if anything was going to be the concern, it was going to be, how do you handle big time adrenaline rushes? How do you handle some failure? Luckily, we didn't see much failure in this game, but there's a good example of how he handles failure later in the series. And he handled all of that extremely well. And that was awesome to see. The Brewers rewarded him and his stuff with an opportunity, and he really, really took advantage of it. And that was awesome. I just said awesome as much as Miz does usually.
The other rookie pitcher who played a really big role in this series, in fact, you could argue he was the second most important pitcher for the Brewers behind
Yeah.
Mizrowski, Chad Patrick, a perfect inning of relief as part of this bullpen game, 2 strikeouts. We'll talk about him in game 5 as well. Jared Koenig ate up 4 outs, struck a guy out. Trevor McGill recording 2 outs, and then Abner Uribe, a perfect 9th inning, striking out the side. A really, really impressive inning from him to lock this one down for the Brewers, to give them what was at the time a commanding 2-0 lead in the series. But like I teased at the beginning of the episode, and as I'm sure you're all aware, the script completely flipped when the series went to Wrigley Field, where the Brewers would drop 2 in relatively convincing fashion on the Cubs side. So game 3, like I said, this one was close, but in the end, it really was once again over in the first inning. Quinn Priester really, really struggling after the Brewers did spot him 1 run in the top of the first. I guess we should talk about the play in the first inning where there was a pop-up hit, and I believe Contreras hit it, and he was credited with an infield single. The ball stayed in play. the umpires deserve a lot of credit for that because they did call it correctly. There were a lot of
Yes.
people who I saw in the moment wondering, why is that not an infield fly? Why is it not an infield fly? The point of the infield fly rule is to protect the base runners. When an infielder is very clearly camped under a ball, it's meant to protect the base runners against that infielder letting that ball drop right in front of him, picking it up, and then starting a double play. Nobody in the Cubs infield was close to getting under this ball because Michael Busch lost it in the sun. Nobody else was really close enough to have a good angle on it, and it just kind of turned into a little bit of a mess. But the umpires made the right call because that was not nobody was camped under it. So there's no real opportunity there to let it drop on purpose and turn a double play. So the ball remained in play, and William Contreras ends up getting an infield single out of that, and that's what kind of sets up that that Sal Frelick sac fly to get the Brewers on the board in the first inning.
Yeah, we don't spend much time, nor does anybody, praising umpires on this show if we bring up umpiring. But that was a really, really good call and a very tough call. And that's one of those things that it's hard to say in the moment or to tell somebody to do this, but like if you're an infielder and you lose a ball in the sun, you should actually pretend that you didn't, that you're like camped if it's an infield fly type situation, because they're going to call it then. If they can't tell, like it's at least within like 10 feet of you and you look like you're camped under it, they're going to call it because their goal there is to protect the base runners. But Bush never made it look like he had any idea where it was because he didn't. And yeah, Contreras at least ran enough to get to first base on the play. And then it was actually really cool to see. I'll bring up two things with Yelich's base running because we didn't talk about it on the Durbin bloop in game one, the 2-run single. Yelich's read on that was unbelievable from second base. I was in the right field bleachers and I had a much better angle than he does standing on second base for that ball. And when I finally was like, yeah, that's falling, I looked up and Yelich was hitting third base, head down, no doubt in his mind. He had already seen that it was going to drop. So that was incredible base running from him. We talked about his base running before, but like he's so good on the bases. On this play, he recognized it early on and he was going to get to third very easily on the play. Terang was on first, I believe, for this one.
Mm-hmm.
It would have had to have been. Yeah.
Yeah.
Terang was on first. He obviously has a little bit more that he has to be aware of there because nobody was at second base. So Yelich had a little more room to maneuver, but he just read it so quickly and was at third. Like, even if they called infield fly, you get to advance at your own risk. So he would have been on third base, even if they called an infield fly, because he read the ball himself and noticed that nobody was actually going to get to it. Like he's just such a good base runner. And then while we're calling out some other baseball stuff, like Pete Crow Armstrong has to cover second base in that scenario. Like center fielders should be paying attention, and there should have been a play on Terang if he had done that, but he didn't. He didn't do the little things that you sometimes have to do in a baseball game to win. It didn't cost them this time, but it could have. And yeah, it was a weird baseball play. Great umpiring. Probably not great baseball from the Cubs, but I thought the Brewers, everyone on the field, did a really good job of kind of recognizing it themselves, because I think a lot of base runners also just assume infield fly is going to be called and that they don't want to advance because they don't want to risk getting out, even if it does fall. So everybody on the Brewers did a really, really good job to recognize, and the umpiring crew. So yeah, it was a weird way to start a game to lead into a sac fly with that, but it was kind of another example of the Brewers doing a lot of little things right, and they just didn't happen to do enough as the game progressed.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it as we go through. Like I said, it really was Quinn Priester, unfortunately, failing to set the tone in this one, or setting the wrong tone in this one, and I think you could kind of see the way that followed the Brewers throughout the game. So, like I said, only recorded 2 outs, 3 hits, couple walks, 1 strikeout, 4 earned runs. And I should note too, of those 2 outs, one of them was a Sal Frelick sliding catch in right field. That inning is even worse if Sal Frelick doesn't
Yeah.
make that play. So Priester's inning was another leadoff homer for Michael Busch, a Nico Horner single. He walked Tucker. Suzuki hit the kind of lofty fly ball down the line where Frelick makes the sliding catch. Happ walks for the second free base of the inning. Carson Kelly does strike out, but then Pete Crow Armstrong hits a 2-run single. Nick Mears comes in and tries to clean it up, and he gets out of the inning, but not before throwing a wild pitch that scores that 4th run. And, you could kind of see the Brewers chipping away a little bit in this one. A lot of it was just Jake Bauers, RBI single in the 4th, and then a homer in the 7th to bring them within 1. He would then come up with the bases loaded in the 8th with 2 outs, and he struck out. But even then, like in that 8th inning specifically, I would point more to a couple of other at-bats over that Jake Bauers one. Bryce Terang had a really rough at-bat in that inning. Sal Frida came up when you had a pitcher on the ropes, and he swung at a first pitch sweeper that barely clipped the zone, and he bounced it out to second base. Like, just not great at-bats in that inning. And there's some other moments you can point to as well. And this is what I kind of wrote about in my story from this game. It just felt like the Brewers knew that they were not in control of this one, and they didn't play poorly, but you could tell there were just some subtle differences in the way that they seemed to be conducting themselves in this game and the style of play that they seemed to be employing in this game. There was also the Caleb Durbin rundown play as well. That was a big one that stood out to me where, to be clear, that is not an easy play for a runner by any stretch of the imagination. And he's trying to make a smart play there, but he gets in the rundown. And at that point, obviously, your number one goal is, okay, I got to make sure that the runners can advance. So get the runners to second and third there so that you're still in an okay situation. It was Brandon Lockridge came up and he squared around a bunt. He pushed it too far, bunted it too hard with that runner on third base. It was runners on first and third. And Michael Busch came crashing in. He made the play. He throws home. Durbin's in the rundown. At that point, you're trying to get the runners to advance. So the throw comes home. Throw goes back to Matt Bush. Or not Matt Bush. Wrong Matt. Matt Shaw. And Shaw, once Shaw starts chasing Durbin back to the plate, Durbin's actually got a very, very reasonable chance of scoring there. I don't think it was guaranteed, but it would have taken a pretty good play by both Matt Shaw and Michael Busch, who was then covering the plate by that point because of the rundown, to get him. He was a dive away from getting into the plate. Busch kind of bobbled the ball, or Shaw kind of bobbled the ball a little bit, but even without the bobble, it would have taken a flip does not get to Busch quickly. So it would just have to be a lot of things would really have to go right from that standpoint for them to get him, I think. And I did ask Pat Murphy about a post game, and he said, yeah, I wish Caleb would have dove into home plate. And he did kind of brush on it too. Like, that's not an easy play. Like, Durbin does not have eyes in the back of his head, but kind of knowing the situation, like, you've been in the rundown long enough that those guys had time to take their extra base. And also, like, we've seen Caleb Durbin play very aggressively. That's kind of his brand. Like, he's not afraid to go out there and put it all on the line. And that was a play where you could tell it just seemed like he was trying to be really, really safe. He had a chance to score, and instead he slammed on the brakes like right in front of home plate and turned around to stay in the rundown because he really wanted to make sure that those guys had advanced, even though they had a lot of time. And like I said, that's not an easy play. I don't think you can really criticize him for this, but I think it kind of fits that overarching theme of the Brewers did not play poorly, but you could tell it was just not quite the same style. And it just seemed like a team that never really felt like they had a chance to be in control of this game. The kind of control that allows you to play a little more freely and a little more aggressively and take some chances.
Yeah, and maybe it is one of those, a lot of young players who are playing their first road playoff game type of situations and maybe overthinking some things or trying to be too perfect or trying not to mess up more than to just play their game, kind of like you were hinting at with Durbin there. I think his whole thought process was like, I need to advance these guys so that it's the same situation as if I hadn't gone and they just got the out at first on this bunt, which would have been second and third. Like, that's what he was trying to do originally. But I think the easiest way to think about it for me, and this is, I had a coach tell me this a long time ago, and it made sense to me. I don't know if it's a real baseball teaching or if it's like a normal baseball thought, but if you're in a rundown and you're within diving distance of a base, it's time to dive to that base. Like, once you get to the distance and you're not tagged by anybody and the guy standing at the base isn't holding the ball, dive. And you might be out, but it's going to take a good toss. It's going to take a good tag. And sometimes that's not something. Matt Shaw hasn't flipped a ball. Like you said, he's probably going backhand flip to a guy who's covering home, who doesn't normally cover home, to try and make a play. And Durbin, especially at home, all you have to do is clip the plate. You don't have to hold on. You don't have to do anything. So, like, there's more room to dive at home plate. There always is. So I was surprised he didn't as well. And like you said, and Murph acknowledged too, like, you can't see. It looked worse because Shaw actually bobbled the ball a little bit as he was trying to get it out of his glove to get it to flip it. And that made it where I think he almost certainly would have been safe if he did actually dive, but he doesn't know that part. That part I fully understand. He has no idea that's happening. But I think you laid it all out. Like, you've got the guys, they've advanced. You've been in the rundown long enough. They are absolutely at the next base. And even if they're not, by the time they flip it to home, they're going to be. They will be there by the time the play is over. They're not going to have time to tag you out at home and then throw to another base and get an out. Like, that's not happening. Zero chance of that. And you're close enough to make a dive. And you might be out, but again, you gave yourself up essentially by trying to go back. That's definitely not better. Like, there's no real upside there. So it was a weird play, like you said. I think going against the brand of not just the Brewers, but Caleb Durbin, like, that's the type of stuff he does. We've seen him score from second on a ground ball in the infield this year on stuff like that. Like, he that's the type of stuff he loves to do. It's part of what's made him valuable, despite maybe not being the most physical or doing everything. Like we've talked about, he does little things well. He does things like that. And yeah, it went a little away from what he did. And I think, because I think you tweeted about it at the time and you probably got some pushback on it. And it wasn't like, again, it wasn't a sure thing he was going to be safe, but I think what we all just laid out there is the reasoning behind that. Like, at that point, there was no upside in going back to third. You were doing nothing. But the upside in going home was that you have a legitimate chance to score there and get a run in a big spot. It would have made it a one-run game at that time with quite a bit more time left in the game, I believe, right? Because this was before the Bowers homer, after the Bowers RBI single, if I'm remembering right. So
yes,
yeah, that one to me, that's one you definitely would have. We laid it all out. It didn't end up mattering. Luckily, they won the one series. It didn't matter, and it wouldn't be one that you could point to and be like, that was a terrible play by Durbin. But it is a good example of like them getting away from what they do well in that particular game.
Would not get better for the Brewers in Game 4. If anything, it got worse. 6-0 Chicago. Freddie Peralta making his second start of the series in this one, and for as much as he stepped up in Game 1, this was kind of Freddie going back to just the same kind of pitcher that we feel like he's plateaued at for quite a few years now, which is very good pitcher, very durable pitcher, highly valuable, but not a great pitcher. And I think you kind of saw some of that in this one. So he again, another rough first inning for the Brewers. Cubs jumping out to an early lead, and again, just had control of this game because of that first inning from there on. Ian Happ doing all the damage in the first with a 3-run homer off of Peralta. So I want to talk about this pitch because number one, it's going to tie back to the Contreras question. I did not think this was a good pitch call. And this is where you like need to be able to read the hitter you need to know the report going in, but you also need to be able to read the hitter because Ian Happ struggles against four-seamers at the top of the zone. He slugged like 200 against four-seamers at the top of the zone in the regular season. So you're looking at the scouting report and you're like, this should be a slam dunk pitch if we can throw it to him. But as you're watching this inning unfold for Freddie Peralta, the one thing I will credit Freddie for is he knew that he needed to be secondary heavy in this start. And that's what he was trying to do. It is what he ended up doing. But he could not establish those secondaries in the first inning. He just could not throw them competitively, especially the changeup. And the changeup has been not only massive for him all season, but especially against the Cubs, because in his second half starts against the Cubs and in his game one start against the Cubs, fewer fastballs and more changeups. And that's what really helped to get him through those outings. And he was trying to do it to an even greater extreme here in the first inning. But basically, all of his changeups were either bounced in the dirt or they missed way wide. Some of them missed like way above the strike zone. Just no pattern to the misses all over the place. Ian Happ comes up. The first pitch that he sees is a changeup that almost hits the dirt. So if you're Ian Happ at that point, you're probably already thinking, okay, like he's not getting these pitches across. I got to be ready for the heater. And you could tell that after that, he was ready for the heater. Freddie did double up on a changeup and he got a called strike on it. Landed it in the zone. It's 1-1 now. You could see from the take, like Happ was ready for fastball. I think you got to go back to something soft one more time, just kind of seeing what his body language is like, because sure enough, he throws him the fastball and you could go back and watch the video. You can see it. Happ starts early. He is ready. Like this is the pitch that he wants. He knows he needs to ambush it. He gets things started early to get around on a fastball that I think the off-center camera angle made it look a little bit worse than it actually was. It was not a great pitch. Freddie did not perfectly hit his spot, but he was actually pretty close to where Contreras wanted that pitch. And if you look at like Savant's 3D zone, it's not right down the middle. It does clip kind of like the bottom part of that top rail of the strike zone. And again, that is a pitch like Freddie has had success throwing the ball to that location. And if you look at, again, Happ's scouting report, he does not hit fastballs in that location. Now, in a perfect world, again, maybe you get it a little bit higher, but I don't think it was an awful pitch. I think it was. I think the sequencing played a very big role here. Like, and it starts with Freddie not being able to establish any of the other stuff. That doesn't make Contreras' job any easier, but he finally got a changeup over for a strike. I think you need to try to throw that one more time because obviously one changeup in the strike zone was not changing Happ's approach. He was very clearly hunting a fastball and he got one. And quite frankly, I'm not sure it really would have mattered where Freddie threw that fastball. I think he would have maybe not homered, but I think he would have hit it pretty hard no matter what.
Yep. I'm sure my dad could back me up because I kept saying it over and over, but I just kept going, stay change up, stay change up, stay change up before that pitch. And he went fastball and yeah, he was all over it. And like you said, it's honestly, Happ is doing kind of what I talked about. Like in that moment, he understands that he knows he's not good at hitting fastballs at the top of the zone. He knows Freddie throws a good fastball that plays well at the top of the zone. So he knows if he's going to hit it, he has to get started early. And with all the other context that you added in terms of, he's really spraying the changeup all over the place. It's not really a pitch he's got a good feel for early. Really, none of the secondaries have a great feel for them in this first inning. To me, that all adds up to a hitter who is going to get started early and is going to want to go attack this fastball. And that's where the Brewers have to, on the other side, and Contreras and Freddie have to recognize that and say, okay, we got to stay soft. And it didn't have to be changeup. I wanted them to stay changeup because he just landed one. And even the first one, it was below the zone. And like you said, almost in the dirt. But like, that's a spot that he'll get chases on. That's a spot that he'll get swings against. I thought those were two of the better changeups he'd thrown the entire inning. So I was like, okay, I think he's actually finding the feel for it right now. Like, stay with it. And I don't think he's going to do anything with it. And if he does, it's probably going to be some flare or some bloop shot or something. Like, he's not going to crush this pitch because he's not looking for it. And yeah, I mean, it's easier to say it's a better angle on TV or, on a monitor than it is behind the plate. And you always have to acknowledge that it's easier to see some of those timing things. I think from those angles, I think some catchers would argue it's the opposite. And that's why people don't want it to be called from the dugout. But for me, I think a lot of the other angles actually give you a better idea of the timing. And I was in the exact same spot as you and saying that, like, he's selling out for fast right now because that's how he's going to get to it. And he got it. and he got to it. And it opened up the game in a way that was going to make it really hard for the Brewers to come back. And obviously they couldn't really get anything going, and it pretty much ended the game in the first inning.
Yeah, pretty much. And Freddie did settle down. He got through 4 innings. He struck out 6 guys. When he was in the strike zone, they were not hitting him. Like, it
Yeah.
was just that one swing from Hap, and otherwise he got a lot of swing and miss. It was good. But again, he just was not commanding the ball well enough in the first inning, throwing it competitively in the first inning. And then you add the questionable pitch call in there, and it just kind of unravels on him. And also, like, this is all going on as the Cubs fans are putting a lot of pressure on him. Like, they had chants going in the crowd. I'm not sure how much you could hear them on the TV broadcast, but they were
Oh
calling
yeah.
his name. They were kind of taunting him, like all this stuff. And I'm not going to say that the moment got to him because I don't know for sure that that's what happened. But these are kind of the situations where if you're going to be the number one, like you have to be better than that in that situation. You just do. And I know it's not easy, but it kind of comes with the territory. You got to be better than that in that spot, and you got to find a way to limit the damage more than he did in that first inning.
Yeah. It's stuff we've always talked about. Like you said, he hasn't quite done it, and we saw more of it this year, but he just hasn't done it as often as we'd like to see it. And yeah, he just couldn't quite put it together. And you could hear it on the broadcast. Believe me, you could hear the Freddie chants. It was reminiscent of the they were copying the Cueto chants in Pittsburgh from back in the day. That was the last time I really remembered that happening, and it had a similar ending. Both ended in homers. So yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I will say this before we get into the rest of the series. Like, a ton of Cubs fans around me at games, not one bad interaction. Like, genuinely, everybody that I saw at games that were Cubs fans that I had any interaction with at all was very, very nice, very reasonable. So I had a pleasant experience with them, and I give them a lot of credit. I thought their atmosphere at Wrigley was phenomenal. So they did a really good job. I don't like Cubs fans. I don't like the Cubs, but I did respect a lot of what I saw from them this series. And genuinely, I know there were a couple issues around the stadium. There's idiots in every fan base, but I had no issue with anybody. I thought they were all pretty reasonable, and everybody was pretty well, just honestly pretty nice people to be around, and good baseball fans. Um, and honestly, that made it a lot more fun for me at the games because I didn't want to be around some hostile environment, and being like, I wanted it to be pumped up. Everybody wants to see good baseball from their team, but everybody can also be reasonable and have a good time. And that was my experience. So that was really nice to see, I would say.
Cubs would add an unearned run against Aaron Ashby after a Caleb Durbin error. So Durbin was only charged with 1 error, but there were 3 plays in this game that he just was unable to come up with or complete. And kind of a small thing, but maybe something to watch as the playoffs go on. I don't know if the Cubs are trying to do this, but they did it successfully. I think they really picked on hit what is still his weakness as a third baseman, which is the arm. And I think Durbin has gotten pretty good
Yeah.
mileage out of a subpar throwing arm at third base by kind of using his body to compensate for that. Like, he attacks balls in a certain way and kind of comes around the ball in certain ways that allow him to kind of use his body to build a little more momentum and just put a better throw, get a little more juice on it. And the Cubs hit a lot of batted balls to third base that were kind of in like the perfect position, the perfect kind of hops where he really couldn't do that. He had to field some balls kind of just not in a super athletic position, or kind of a more awkward position, or a more stiff position, or just in a position where he really couldn't like come around the ball the way that he sometimes does. It just seemed like they did a really good job of kind of tucking a lot of these ground balls into spots where he really was put in a position where the play had to be made with all arm. And that's when a lot of these plays unraveled for him.
Yeah, my guess is that's not something obviously that the ground balls themselves that they could do on purpose. But I think the question becomes, could a team like the Dodgers potentially bunt a ball in positions that make it difficult for Durbin to be able to do those types of things, like bunts for hits towards third? And honestly, when he first came up, that was one of my fears with him was, will teams bunt towards him, and can he handle that with the arm and everything else? Because like you said, that's going to be an arm throw. Like, you're going to get your hips involved in the throw, but you're not going to be able to, like you said, create momentum, and not even just creating momentum, but gaining ground, like making yourself closer to first base makes up some of the time and some of what you need to get out of your arm as well. So, yeah, that is going to be something to watch, because I do agree. Like, he didn't get an error for the high throw in this game on a ball down the line, and I think it would have been close at first, but I think he would have had, it was Shaw by a step. Like, to me, that was an error too. I think he should have had 2 errors in this game, and it really wasn't really a question for me. But I also do wonder, some of it, again, it's a road environment for a guy who hasn't played much in these types of environments. Like, is there just some stuff where you mess up your footwork, or you start to rush things because you start to, just everything speeds up on you a little bit? Like, there could be some of that as well. But I did think about that myself, and it did make me wonder if maybe, PCA started trying to bunt towards third base with 2 strikes a couple times this series. And I wonder if that was part of the reason. He thought if he could get it past the pitcher, he wasn't going to be able to get him out. Like, I wonder if that was part of the thought process there. So it did make me wonder if it's something that we might see teams start to kind of press a little bit against them and see if they could, in a weird spot, in a spot where bunting for a hit or even a sack bunt might net you a hit, if you can get it in the right area against Durbin. Like, will that come up at some point? Who knows? But it caught my attention too.
Robert Gasser also pitched out of the bullpen in this one once the game was not quite decided, but pretty close. And he was hit pretty hard, 2 innings, 5 hits, gave up 2 solo homers, almost gave up another one to Carson Kelly, but foul by maybe 2 feet at most.
Yeah.
Really, really close one. But I was shocked to see him get hit this hard, because I had kind of mentioned this before, like, stuff wise, he seemed to match up okay against this Cubs team. Like, this is a Cubs team that, like we said, they drill fastballs. They've struggled more against sliders and big sweepers than any other pitch, and that's kind of Robert Gasser's bread and butter. But they were hitting him hard throughout his 2 innings. Like, just about every batted ball was hit very, very hard. And we kind of talked about it privately. Like, was there something going on with pitch tipping? I don't know, but I was surprised to see him get hit this hard. And now it's kind of a discussion of, okay, is he going to be on the next playoff roster? What do they do there? But to see it be that bad, even in a small sample, like when the contact is that loud, it does kind of raise a discussion point.
Yeah. I mean, not even just the Carson Kelly near miss, but there was even a fly out to the wall in left center that missed the basket half a foot. So he got hit hard, and 5 hits total in 2 innings, even beyond, 3 other hits beyond the 2 homers and a near miss foul ball and a near miss fly out. Like, he was getting smoked. And like I told you when we were texting about it, like they showed Kyle Tucker in the dugout talking to a few Cubs hitters after, he let off the inning. He was the first hitter to face Gasser, and he hit a homer off of him. And then he went into the dugout, and he actually like turned, looked at the camera briefly, and kind of like shifted his body, and then looked like he was kind of, it made me think it was a set position thing, just given the way he was positioning himself, kind of trying to show like maybe something he's doing with his hands or something he's doing with his glove. Who knows? Again, that's more just me kind of reading context clues. I have no clue if that's actually what was happening or not. But it did make me wonder if maybe that was kind of the cause of this, because like you said, it just didn't, I was not expecting that at all when he went in the game. And I knew, he's coming off an injury. He only had a few major league appearances. this year. Like there was a chance he was maybe going to struggle a little bit, but I just did not expect the contact to be as loud as it was. And I think it does raise some questions about whether he's the current version of what Gasser is coming off the injury and potentially with a bit of a tip is somebody that ends up on the NLCS roster. And I guess we'll find out probably by the time most of you are listening to this.
On the offensive side, the Brewers got shut out. It was a pretty lifeless night for them, especially outside of the fifth inning. So let's break down that fifth inning, because that was really the one moment where the Brewers had a potential threat going and a chance to, get right back in this game, especially like before Gasser came in and gave up a little more damage. So the Brewers led off the inning with a Sal Frelick double and a Blake Perkins walk. That puts runners on first and second, nobody out. Joey Ortiz is coming up in a very pivotal run scoring situation here where you've got kind of a budding rally. And the Brewers let him take an at bat, or take a plate appearance, I should say, but they don't let him swing. He sack bunts. It was a perfectly adequate sack bunt, which I should also note, like that's already, you're taking a little bit of a risk there too, because Joey Ortiz has like a less than 30% success rate on sacrifices in his 2 seasons with the Brewers. And when I say that percent, or that success rate, also includes like it's attempts when he squared. So not just the at bat. So that includes like he squared, but he missed it, or he squared and he fouled it back, but the at bat continues, like things like that. So, but the bottom line is he is not good at it. He's arguably one of their worst bunters. He got it down though. He did his job, the job the Brewers asked him to do, but you gave away an out. Now Christian Yelich is up. He strikes out against Boyd. There was a rough strike one call to kick off that at bats. So that obviously doesn't help anything, but Boyd also gave him a pretty good sequence there. He worked in and out really well. And then Jackson Chourio, a first pitch fastball inside. He swings, jam shot to shortstop. Inning is over. No damage for the Brewers. I asked Pat Murphy post-game about the decision to have Joey Ortiz bunt and the decision to let him go up there, too. I asked if a pinch hitter was a possibility at that point. Murphy said, no, not really. He said we didn't want to burn, 2 guys in that situation. If we hit someone other than Monasterio, they didn't want to lose the glove. The point about burning 2 guys is funny because Murph did that the night before with some pinch hitting moves because, he had Blake Perkins hit in, did he have Perkins hit for, he had Perkins hit not for,
hit Collins and then Perkins hit.
Yes, he hit Collins and then Perkins, but by doing that in the order that he did it, he did not have Perkins hit for Brandon Lockridge. So the way that it all went down was there was like some extra roster maneuvering that he had to use 2 guys, and he wasn't willing to do that the following night apparently. But the bigger takeaway here is Joey Ortiz puts the Brewers in a tough spot in these situations, and this was kind of a situation that was almost destined to pop up in the playoffs, and it was going to be a question of how do the Brewers handle this? Do they see an opportunity to strike in front of them and go to the bench, or do they let Joey Ortiz go up there? And, I saw a lot of people saying, just take the heat off of Ortiz. He's doing his job of getting the bunt down. But I would argue that's part of the problem, that's his job. They trust him so little to do something productive that even when you have a budding rally, you are going to go with the play that actually is more likely to kill your rally or contribute to killing your rally. The run probability numbers are still out there. When you go from first and second and nobody out to second and third and 1 out, the average number of runs you can expect to score, the average number of runs that have scored in the past in real games, when that situation changes from first and second, nobody out to second and third, 1 out, it goes down. So you are reducing your chances at a big inning when the Brewers were down by 3 runs in the game still at this point. That's sobering that the Brewers basically seem to feel like when he steps into the box in these situations, they kind of have to give up on a big inning. as it's starting to kind of take shape. And Murphy even said it postgame. He said, yeah, we decided that we just wanted to play to get one run on the board and then see if that would spur the offense a little bit. But that to me, you can't play like that. Like, you got to be able to go, like, play aggressively again, go for the big swing and give yourself as many opportunities to take advantage of that situation as you can. It's tough. Joey Ortiz, and I don't even, if you were set on having him hit, I I I don't know if I would say having him bunt is the right call still, but I think it's defensible, because the flip side of this coin is what
Yeah.
happens if he pops out. You stand to go back to run probability, run expectancy. The amount that you lose in terms of runs you can expect to score if he drops down the bunt is not nearly the amount you would lose if he records an out without advancing those runners. And I think that's really the game the Brewers are playing here. But again, if you are in a position where you essentially have to pivot your entire approach to an inning to being risk averse instead of being opportunistic, that is a problem. So now the question is, like, what does that balance look like? And again, I'm not convinced they made the wrong call here, because I think you can, like, the Brewers didn't have to win this game. They would still be alive if they lost it. And I get the defense side of it and all that. But it's a tricky situation, and it would come up again in game 5, although I think game 5 was a different situation, one where I was actually very okay with letting him hit. But this is something that the Brewers are going to continue having to weigh, because it's probably not the last time he's going to come up, especially now that they've moved on, in a situation where they have a chance to make something happen and they need to make a decision. Okay, do we send Joey Ortiz up there and basically automatically forego an opportunity to have a big inning, or do we you know, pull the trigger right now, push that button, sacrifice defense in favor of trying to change the game right here and flip the score?
Yeah, and in this particular scenario, when you're struggling offensively and down 3, to me that is the time to pull that trigger and make that move. Interestingly enough, that particular scenario is probably the best time you could have had Rhys Hoskins on the roster. Lefty on the mound, almost certainly not going to go away from him because you have Yelich on deck. That's where you would, like, Rhys Hoskins could hit a 3-run homer and you could go to it. But with Boyd on the mound, you're not putting Bowers in. I don't think Brandon Lockridge is really an upgrade over Joey Ortiz if you go to that. Isaac Collins, better against righties than lefties. Yes, he's probably a little bit better of an option against a lefty than Ortiz is, but is that big of an upgrade itself? Danny Jansen might actually be your best option, but then you have no backup catcher the rest of the game. So, like, I think the options were limited other than Monasterio. And to me, that actually is probably who I would have hit. He's been pretty good against lefties since he's been in the big leagues. And I think that would have been the time to go to Monasterio and say, hey, we're going to have to live with the possibility that we score 3 runs here and then Monasterio costs us one later. But I think that's just how you have to play that, because you're down 3 and the offense is just not doing anything for the game. And in terms of letting him hit, and when they did let him hit, like, I'm with you. I think bunting is defensible there. I don't blame them if they were going to have him hit for letting him do that, or having him do that. But you made the argument, he could pop up, but then you also mentioned that he hasn't been great at bunting, so he could pop up the bunt as well, and it's the exact same thing. So yeah, it's tough for me. The options weren't great. And like I said, that is literally the best time you would have wanted to have Rhys Hoskins on the roster. But if I were making the call, I would have gone to Monasterio there and said, you know what, this is going to give us our best shot at having a bigger inning, potentially making this a game again. And it's really the only guy that makes much sense in the matchup. And Murph alluding to the fact that he would probably have to make 2 changes. He wouldn't in this case. He would just be using one player who gives them a better chance against the lefty, gives them a better chance to get back into the game. and it's only one substitution. So to me, that would have been the move. But like you said, I understand. Like, I do get what he's saying. I get how it's an issue, and I think it is something that could potentially be an issue again. But I do think it's going to take a lefty being on the mound, because that's going to be the hardest time for them to find a good pinch hitter on their bench, is if a lefty's on the mound. If a righty's on the mound, you can go to Jake Bauers and feel really good about it, I think, if you have that type of scenario. But a righty on the mound or a lefty on the mound is going to make it difficult, because the options are just a little bit tougher.
As long as we're talking about it, I might as well bring up the Game 5 situation where Ortiz hit with the bases loaded with 2 outs. That one I think is completely okay, because I know everyone's going to see bases loaded and be like, "Oh man, that's actually with 2 outs. That's actually not as big of a scoring opportunity as you think." Like, let's just do some basic math here. There's 2 outs. What's the league average on base percentage? Like 315. Like, the math is not in your favor for scoring a run there. So in that situation, I'm okay with letting Joey Ortiz hit there. If there's 2 outs, I think it really is just situational. I think the situations where it's going to matter more is if he comes up in a spot where you have the very, very real potential to have a big inning. That's when you need to make the decision. And you're down by a couple as well.
Yeah.
They were up by 1 run when they let him hit with the bases loaded with 2 outs.
Right.
I thought that was completely fine. Like, that's not actually, number one, you already have the lead. So at that point, like, if you're playing the moment, playing for what's right in front of you, you're winning the game. You need defense to ensure that you continue winning the game. But then in the situation in Game 4, you're down by 3. The immediacy of the moment calls for you need to score runs, not keep them off the board right now. And there's nobody out. You have a potential to make that happen. And now I think then it becomes a much more serious discussion of, okay, we got to really consider just kind of taking that gamble here right now. I don't think they were in that spot in Game 5. So it's very situational. But if that Game 4 type situation comes up again in the NLCS, I think it's tough. But I think they need to be more willing to push that button than they seem to be right now.
I agree. And yeah, like you're mentioning the 2 outs. If there's 2 outs in the 7th inning and you're down by 3 runs, then you're still in a spot where you need the runs and you need to take the shot that someone might gap one and score those 3. So it's not even just that particular inning situation. It's the score of the game. It's the inning that it's in. If it's the 2nd inning versus the 7th inning, like, this was right in the middle of the game, which makes it more difficult. It's not a clear-cut answer. I don't think there is one in this scenario, but for me, that is the time where it's worthwhile to take that shot and make the trade-off that you might not have the defense you want the rest of the game. And they didn't, like you said. I think they should be more open to it if it comes up again.
All right. Now let's talk about what was a good night for Milwaukee. Game 5, the Brewers winning 3-1 to send them to the NLCS and to send Craig Counsell and the Cubs packing for the 2025 season. So it seemed pretty clear right from the get-go that it was going to be a kind of similar plan to the way the Brewers approached Game 2, where it was going to be you start with a reliever. Jacob Mizorowski is kind of your closest thing to a bolt guy. It's maybe not going to be a 5 or 6, but a 3 to 4. And then, by that point, hopefully you're in a spot where you can turn it over to the leverage guys at the back end. And that was pretty much exactly how it played out. So Trevor McGill was the choice to open this game. And Spencer, we both talked about this amongst ourselves. He would not have been our choice. I would have gone with Jared Koenig personally, just to kind of play the game with the lefties again and see, kind of like force Craig to make a decision of, hey, you want to hit Michael Busch here or do you want to go Justin Turner? Because, I talked to some people about this. Like, from the Cubs' perspective, yes, you would rather hit Turner than Busch against a lefty because Turner's got better numbers against lefties than Busch does against lefties. But you would also prefer to have that happen if you're the Brewers, because Busch is better against righties than Turner is against lefties. So it's kind of, it's like something that both teams might want to do or would prefer.
Yeah.
But they did go to McGill instead. And the one thing that we both kind of said was, okay, like, and it's not a bad matchup either. Like, McGill's fine, McGill's good. And there was the upside of if he gets through a scoreless inning here, there's probably nobody in that bullpen who's better equipped to conjure the kind of emotion that he could in the first inning of a baseball game. Because we've seen that guy get very animated out there. He's 7 feet tall. He throws almost 100 miles an hour, usually throws 100 miles an hour. He's a tick below that now coming off the flexor strain, but big dude, very intense guy, throws hard, is not afraid to come off the mound screaming after he gets a big strikeout. And that's exactly what happened in the first inning. He ratcheted it up to 99, struck out Kyle Tucker on a high fastball above the strike zone, and just went nuts as he was coming off the mound, kind of motioned to the crowd and hyped them up, got the dugout going. And I did ask a couple guys in the clubhouse and in the media room after the game, like, how did that set the tone for you? And they were like, yeah, that mattered. Like the way that he came out and did that and kind of stirred up that emotion, that
Mhm.
absolutely set a tone. So credit to him for starting that game about as favorably as you could have, especially given that we had seen, the Cubs scoring first and the way that that had impacted the Brewers in the previous two games.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is that was part of the equation with having him go first. Um, and if it was, credit to Murph. I mean, that's a good pulse on what a team and probably a fan base need, especially, Brewers fans just watch the Brewers lose 2 in a row in Chicago. They've watched a lot of playoff heartbreak the last 7 or 6 seasons since 2018. They needed somebody who would come out and get them going, have a clean inning, and then get everybody fired up. And McGill did it. And yeah, he said some very clean things coming off the mound. I'm sure nothing that started with F or S or any of that. But no, that was huge. And I saw he was getting crap on social media from national accounts. So like he got the first 3 outs of the game and looked like he might have just won the game. But I mean, I'd make the argument he kind of helped. And like you said, talking to some of the guys and them having that reaction shows that in a way it did kind of lead them into the energy and catapult them into what they needed to go win this game, a winner take all game against a huge rival with mostly Brewer fans, but also a contingent of away fans more than you would normally have at a winner take all playoff game. And I mean, you needed the Brewer fans and everybody to get into it early, and he did a great job with it. And then in the bottom half of the inning, it just got louder.
Yeah, I mean, you saw the impact of that immediately. Well, William Contreras hitting a solo homer in the bottom of the first. I think this series has also like demonstrated like how much of a vibes fire them up kind of guy he is too. I think that was something that kind of seemed to fly under the
Yeah.
radar, but as the Brewers got into like serious contention this year as the year went along, as they got into now this big playoff series, like Contreras, I think you could see glimpses of that side of him, but he had more opportunities in this series to let that side of him out. And it made for some pretty entertaining moments because
Mhm.
he, whether it was like some of his comments to the media, whether it was some of the home run celebrations after a couple of big swings in this series, he showed that he wants this and he's someone who can get the rest of these guys into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Players Tribune article that he wrote before the series, if you haven't read that as a Brewers fan, you are absolutely going to want to read that. That's a guy that you really want to root for with how he attacks everything and how much how highly he spoke of the Brewers and the city and the organization. Um, and then he went out and he demonstrated it all series. Like you said, the energy from the start, obviously hitting the double in game 1 and then the go ahead homer in game 2. And even just, you could tell throughout the 2 losses, he had kept the energy up. And honestly, it's done differently. It's not done with like the same smile and the same type of energy as Willy Adames, but it reminded me of Willy Adames, like the guy who keeps everyone together, who has the big moment, who kind of revels in those big moments and shows up and has a celebration that even makes the moment bigger than it already is. And that was, I mean, he played an incredible series overall, but he also brought the energy and I think had that kind of what we talked about with McGill, but on the offensive side of the ball and even on the defensive side of the ball with some of the stuff, he's done this all season. People don't maybe notice it. I think they noticed it in one of the playoff games, but like after a big out or after maybe like a stressful inning, William Contreras likes to take the ball and he likes to try and see if he can hit the windows of Fam up in the upper deck. He will chuck a ball all the way up into the 400s. And it's just one of those things that I think it gets some of the guys on the team fired up in the dugout. Like at game 2, I had good seats where I could kind of see the dugout out of the top rail. And he did that after one of the innings. I can't remember which one. And guys on the dugout are like immediately slapping the padding and like they love it. So I think it's another example of like he does to kind of rile up the team and get everybody fired up. And kind of like we talked about with McGill, I think it's something that's been overlooked and maybe I didn't even necessarily notice throughout the season, but I absolutely noticed it this series. And yeah, it was a really big part of the equation, I think.
Unsurprisingly, it was then Jacob Mizorowski time, and he went 4 innings this time. It didn't start great, though. He promptly allowed a solo shot to Seiya Suzuki to lead off his outing, and it was on a fastball that probably should have been higher up in the zone. It was at the bottom of the zone, and Suzuki was able to get to it and drive it to right field. After that, though, very breaking heavy for him, for a guy who's predominantly known for the big fastball. Really heavy slider usage for him, too. Only 31% of Mizorowski's pitches in this outing were fastballs, which is far and away the lowest of any tracked outing of his professional career. So any outing where we had StatCast to actually track the pitch types he was throwing in an outing. But that allowed him to settle in, though. He bounced back right away. Like I said, the mix was a little different. 4 innings, 3 hits. Didn't walk anybody in this one. He was in the zone a lot. Struck out 3 guys. And I did ask him about the heavy breaking ball usage after the game, and he just kind of pointed back to that Suzuki home run and said, I saw that swing and was kind of like, oh, okay, that's what they're going to try to do against me. Let's roll with this instead and kind of mix things up a little bit. So credit to him, credit to William Contreras for the way he called the rest of that game, and I would assume credit to Chris Hook and Jim Henderson and a lot of the guys in the dugout who I would imagine probably had something to do with that adjustment as well. But really well done to execute a way different game plan the second time the Cubs saw him in this series to get the job done once again for the second time in this series. He was absolutely massive for him. Christian Yelich said after the game, they don't win this series without him.
No, they don't. I mean, it was huge. And yeah, to be able to adjust. And again, this is a guy that there are just a lot of questions about. How can he adjust? How can he handle moments like that? Is he even going to be able to make it on the roster? Or if they do have him on the roster, can they trust him? And in 2 games, he goes out there and shows, like I said, in game 1, there really wasn't anything that he had to bounce back from. Game 2, but his first game. In this one, he immediately gives up a game-tying home run. And the crowd is deflated, other than the, maybe 8,000 Cubs fans who are now very loud and cheering. And the whole mood kind of flipped in that moment. And I'd be lying if I wasn't sitting in the stands going like, all right, let's see. Like, this could go a lot of ways right here. Like, this could be a struggle. And honestly, I should point out the very next batter. We just talked about Caleb Durbin and some defensive struggles in game 4. Very next batter hit like a chopper, 2-hopper towards third that Durbin had to make a tough play on. He had to go get it on that second hop before it hit the ground again and make a throw on the run. Got him by half a step. That guy reaches, like, all bets are off. Who knows? Now Miz is out of the stretch. Now he's got guys on base. He just gave up a homer. He gave up an infield hit. So Durbin made a really big play there. I think that was a play that really didn't get much attention, but like, I have no idea how it would have gone after that for Miz. You hope it would have been great. You hope he would have been fine. but we've seen it. It can spiral sometimes, and he did a great job not letting it. But you just wonder if he doesn't make that play, what happens? And yeah, credit to, again, two rookies that in that spot. Durbin makes a play after struggling the day before on defense. Miz just gave up a homer and bounces right back. Like, that's the stuff the Brewers did all year. And it showed up in this game from guys that a lot of teams probably wouldn't have been willing or wanting to trust in these games. And this is how the Brewers have done it all year. And they stuck with their guns and stuck with the guys that they know have the ability to get it done. And they did. And yeah, it was really impressive from him. And that's even not even mentioning much about how much he changed his normal approach and was still able to attack the zone enough to keep the Cubs off of him. And I mean, no walks in 4 innings was huge for Miz.
Andrew Vaughn had the big swing in this one, a solo homer in the 4th to give the Brewers a lead they would not relinquish. Bryce Terang as well hit an insurance homer in the 7th. It was a good swing for him to see after some not so great results early in the series. Back to the pitching side, though, Aaron Ashby was the first guy out of the bullpen after Miz. He came in the 6th and not looking great again. He was pretty wild throughout the entirety of the series, even in the games where he wasn't necessarily giving up runs. There was a lot of wildness for him and a lot of non-competitive pitches and working behind guys. It just never really looked great. And that was kind of the case in this one, too. 84-mile-an-hour single snuck through to lead off the inning. There's not a whole lot you can do about that. But then he hits Nico Horner, and all of a sudden you got first and second. Cubs have the go-ahead run on base. Where is this going to go from here? But what I do want to circle here is he strikes out Kyle Tucker, the last guy he faces. And going into this series, I did point out over the last month of the year, he basically brought back that four-seam fastball. He really hadn't thrown it much the entire season. Mixed it in more, the high four-seamer in his last 3 or 4 regular season outings. And my question was, I wonder if he's preparing to show this a lot more in October. Because I can't remember who did a story on it. Was it Eno Saris about how pitchers are increasingly pulling out new pitches or new ways they're going at guys in October? It comes back to the point that you made about how you maybe need to you can benefit from showing guys something different.
I saw the story. I believe Eno Saris sounds right, but I don't want to say for sure it was.
Okay.
But yes, it is very similar to what I was talking about. Like you show a different fastball variation than what guys have seen or know you throw. And yeah, you go ahead.
But yeah, and it turns out that's exactly what's happened in the playoffs. He's thrown it a lot. He's mixed in a lot of four-seamers, way more than we're used to seeing. And he did it to Tucker here. 2 straight four-seamers after he fell behind 3-1, and Tucker swung and missed at both of them. That is, not the outing Aaron Ashby wants, but that is a massive out that gives Chad Patrick then a way to get through this. And Chad Patrick, to his credit, does it. Again, really big in this series. Like I said, quite possibly the number 2 most valuable pitcher for the Brewers in this series. A guy who started the entire year, but then he pitched 4 times in a 5-game series when he's not super used to coming out of the bullpen. The velo continued to play up like it did in his couple relief outings late in the year. And something I said to you, too, it seems like that's helping the separation with the new slurve that he's throwing as well, because all of the fastballs have picked up 2 to 3 miles an hour, depending on the night out of the bullpen. So he had nights in this series where it was the cutter was up to 92, but the slurve was still 84, as opposed to the cutter being 88 and the slurve being 84. It seems like that's helping him get even more separation. But he came in this situation and did a great job. Won a battle with Seiya Suzuki. It was a hard hit fly out to left center field, but Suzuki did get under it, so he was able to beat him. But then Ian Happ comes up and just a perfectly executed backdoor cutter. Really, really well done pitch. And then to see Chad Patrick showing more emotion than we've ever seen him come close to showing. He's usually a guy who's pretty subdued. both on and off the field when we talked to him. Just kind of a guy who just kind of goes about his business. But in that moment, to see him, basically just go nuts after recording probably the biggest out of his life, that was very entertaining to see.
Yeah, it was very cool to see. I mean, that yeah, we talked about it on the preview episode, but like I wanted to make sure we gave him credit because we weren't ever talking down or talking badly about Chad Patrick. We were always just kind of like, okay, the start to his career is really not. It's not something that he's going to be able to continue without making some changes and some improvements. But by the end of the year, his FIP matched his ERA, and they were both quite solid. And he had more strikeouts than innings pitched, and walks were in a pretty solid place. Like he did a lot of really good things this year. In the move to the pen, just up the ante. Like the stuff plays up. Like you said, there's more separation between the two pitches, which is part of what we talked about him needing in general. But then the velos helping the fastball play up and get probably some extra. Like he's always gotten with the cutter that he throws so often. The four seam has gotten some whiffs, especially when it's up and above the zone. But like guys are struggling to get to it because it's all of a sudden 97, 98 a couple times instead of it being 94, 95. And then the cutter, like you said, still being, probably 4 or 5 miles per hour slower than the fastball, maybe even a little more on some nights. But then you get the slurve in that mid 80s realm, and like it's legitimately hard. And he still throws the sinker in there once in a while. Like he wasn't only he was perfect for the series. He did not allow a base runner. He had 0 base runners allowed in this series in his 4 outings. And like you said, not a guy who's at all used to going 4 times out of 5 games. And yes, there's more off days than usual and in the DS and everything else, but like he didn't pitch in game 1. These were the last 4 games. He pitched in 2, 3, 4, and 5. So like back-to-back days against the Cubs at Wrigley, which I believe is the team he grew up rooting for. And then like just extremely impressive showing. And yeah, like you said, seeing him come off the mound with emotion, both innings, really. He finished the 6th, and then he also had the perfect 7th, struck out 2 more. And he was a little more, he kind of caught himself quicker after the 7th inning when he struck out the final batter, but he still showed a pretty big rush of emotion for a second and then kind of caught himself. I wonder if he was thinking he might go back out there for the 8th potentially, especially with Shaw leading off. I was wondering myself if they were going to have him, and we can get into it in a second, but I was wondering if they were going to have him face Shaw, and then at that time it was only a 1-run game. Turang adds the homer to make it a 2-run game in the bottom of the 7th, and then go to Koenig for the top of the order and the lefties. So I was curious if that was what they might do. I didn't know if they would or not, but I wondered if that was part of the reason he caught himself like, oh, I might not be done. I should probably stay focused here. But yeah, all of it. I mean, Chad Patrick, really, really good season, and then unbelievable NLDS. Like you could not ask for more from him. Like just really, really impressive stuff.
It was then Abner Uribe time for a 6-out save. And we kind of talked about this on our own, but that I think they took a gamble here because if this does not work, yes, you do still have Koenig, but there's some pretty massive downside here. If Uribe comes out and he's not super sharp and things aren't going well, number one, you missed your opportunity to line up Koenig for the best pocket because you had Shaw and then the top of the order with Bush and Tucker coming up in the 8th. So it seemed like a situation where Koenig would match up best there. You get him through that inning, and then Abner gets the 9th and faces the righties, and everything works out how you're hoping. If Abner comes in the 8th and doesn't do well against the lefties, not only could you be in a spot where all of a sudden you don't have the lead anymore, but number 2, now Koenig needs to come in and he doesn't have, the best possible matchup that you could give him, or just having the handedness favorability there. And the thing was, Uribe came out and he really didn't look that good. I think you can make a case that this is actually among his worst, especially the 8th inning, among his worst innings of the year process wise. He was falling behind a lot of guys. The command wasn't very good. Just the contact wasn't, he wasn't getting crushed, but it wasn't really soft contact either. It was, it didn't look all that great to me at least. But he did come out in the ninth, and it was a lot smoother in the ninth. He got some weaker contact, some ground balls, or
Yeah.
like some more medium hit line drives in that ninth inning too. But yeah, I mean, and that speaks more to how good he had been all season. But yeah, funny enough, I think you can rank this in like one of his 3 worst process outings of the year, and he still got the 2 innings saved to send the Brewers to the NLCS.
Yeah. And we talked about it, like you said, kind of texting last night. We won't say how late it was when we were texting about Abner Uribe's outing, but it was sitting in the bleachers, like watching him go down 2-0 to Ballesteros, who's pinch hitting. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to backfire like very quickly. And I'm in full blown. I just watched Devin Williams a year ago in a 2-run lead. Like it gets 2-0 and I'm just having flashbacks like immediately. And I clarify, I asked you later if it was true, but I was pretty certain he went out of the zone to end up hitting the fly out to left field, and he did. Like it very easily could have been 3-0. And at that point, he's taking. Uribe was kind of all over the place. He fell behind very quickly to the next hitter. Like it could have been a leadoff walk. Things could have gone poorly. So Ballesteros going out of the zone may have saved that outing for him like immediately, because he still fell into some trouble. And yeah, it could have been a lot worse than it ended up being. Like you said, process wise, that 8th inning was about as bad as it got for him this year, but it also says a lot about the type of season that he had. And we're getting long already, and we have to talk about the NLCS a little bit, but like, I do think we need to kind of acknowledge just how far he came this year, because when we talked about the season beforehand, we didn't know what the Brewers were going to get out of Abner Uribe. Like we talked about how, yeah, they'll probably keep him on the opening day roster literally just to serve the suspension that he had, the 4-game suspension. We were like, this is the best time to serve it. Then we both agreed there's a decent chance he goes back to Nashville after that and does some work on, some mechanical stuff, some working on the command, working on maybe being a little more slider heavy, or working on specifically getting the fastball in the zone more, or whatever. Like we thought there was going to be some extra work to be done potentially. We didn't know if he was going to be on the big league roster after his suspension. And in the end, he ended up turning out one of the better seasons from Brewers reliever in a long line of very, very good seasons from Brewers relievers, and just had a phenomenal season and showed a lot of growth as a pitcher, but also like just mentally, you can see it. There's no sign of a blow up really at any point this entire season. Never a sign of getting all that close to being in a fight. Never really a sign of getting too upset with an umpire. I think there were like 2 times that I can think of, and both times you could actually see him physically step off the back of the rubber and kind of take a deep breath and just try and reset himself. So like he really worked on a lot of that stuff, and he deserves a ton of credit because the upside was always very high. I think we both agreed that it actually maybe wasn't as high as a lot of people thought it was, but at this point, it probably is about as high as people think it was because he's been so good this year. But like, it just, he deserves so much credit for that. I mean, there was just a lot of question marks, and he really answered all of them above and beyond what anyone really should have or could have expected this year. And yeah, I mean, even going 2 innings for the first time all year, and it wasn't pretty necessarily, but being able to do that and do that in that spot is another impressive thing. And I remember the last time he pitched in a playoff game before this series was that Diamondbacks game where he lost it. I mean, the ball was all over the place. He didn't make the roster for the Mets series, if people forget. Well, he was hurt. He hurt himself playing hacky sack. Another example. But he did struggle mightily in that Diamondback series when he got his opportunity. Ball was flying all over the place. He couldn't get in the zone. He was clearly starting, he was like kicking the mound. He was very frustrated. And to be able to bounce back and perform, game 2 was unbelievably good. And then to come out and get a 2-inning save after everything else, just ton of credit to him. Really, really impressive. Love to see the growth as a player, but as a person too. Like, it's always very cool to see that from younger players. And you never know. That's the part you don't know. You know they're going to get better at baseball in some ways. They're not going to be, unless they have no work ethic, they're going to get better with major league coaching and major league ability and his type of stuff. But you never know if a player is going to be able to grow up. And he clearly did this year and just deserves so much credit for that. And hopefully we, get to continue seeing that throughout the rest of the playoffs. But yeah, I figured we should, I needed to acknowledge that at least, because it was very much a question mark coming into the season.
Just to kind of put a bow on this NLDS, I do think in some ways, like some of the look, like our more specific predictions for how exactly this might go game by game, I don't think they ended up being crazy accurate by any stretch. But sometimes that's what playoff baseball is about, making analysts look like idiots because who knows what happens in a short sample. But I do think there were a couple things that we pointed out that did end up playing out in this series. And number one was the Brewers not needing to slug a ton, but needing to slug enough. And they did slug enough in this series. And that was a big reason why they moved on. We kind of talked about how their approach of, put the ball in play, make some things happen, and hope that in a way can kind of put you in a position to get more breaks. That might not work in a small sample all the time the way that it did throughout the regular season. And it could be because you run into a good defensive team like the Cubs who just handle that and make all the plays. It could be just small sample where your luck turns in the wrong direction. And yes, the Cubs made a couple misplays throughout the series. I also think that there were just as many moments where they made some plays that like don't look impressive in the box score or on the highlight reels, but you could see, like, especially in their infield, the way that a lot of like Horner and Swanson and Shaw played certain balls, like it looked really, really clean. And I think they made some more challenging plays look very routine. But also, like, look at game 3 or game 5 more specifically. The Brewers hit a lot of balls hard in that game, and they only had 6 hits. I think I know I wrote it in the story I did from game 5. I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but it was basically out of all the batted balls that they hit within the field of play, so not home runs, within the field of play that were hard hit, it was well in the double digits, and only 3 of them went for hits. So they kind of ran into that in this game where the breaks weren't always going their way. Cubs, making a couple of rangy plays to run some of these balls down, or some really slick plays in the infield to, like, for example, knock down a 104-mile-an-hour Jackson Chourio ground ball that might have gotten past a lot of guys, like things like that. But the Brewers cut through that just enough because they hit 3 solo homers. And again, 3 runs is not a lot. 3 home runs in a game it's pretty good. It's not crazy, but still, it was just enough. And I think it does reinforce you need to be able to pull that out of your bag in the right moments, like, because the best way to cut through batted ball luck and defenses and all of this is you hit the ball over the fence. And the Brewers didn't slug like crazy in this series, but even if you go back to like their first 2 wins of the series, they didn't like hit a crazy number of home runs in those games either. But they hit the ball really hard in those games. Like, those were not small ball Brewers games. They put up runs because, again, like the 3 straight doubles to lead off game 1, some of the contact that they made in game 2, like they were hitting the ball hard in the gaps. That's different than kind of what we saw them do throughout a lot of the year. So, for all this talk that we had about, do the Brewers have it in them to do this enough, to slug enough? They went out and did it in the NLDS, and the pitching obviously was a huge factor in this as well. And like we talked about, that kind of lowers the bar of how much you need to slug, and it kind of works in their favor in a way. But the offense slugged enough, and that's a big reason why they're still alive and they're moving on and they're going to get a chance to play for the pennant.
Yeah. Games 2 and 5, every run the Brewers scored was via the home run ball. Now, game 5 was literally 3 home runs, but game 2, it was a 3-run homer, a solo shot, and a 3-run homer. That's how they won the game. And it was a response to a 3-run homer in the first inning that put them back in the game. So it is you got to take it.
Spencer's dying. So it's important. And I think we saw examples,
but I'm back.
We saw examples about how
Yes.
of how that can flip the game and how that can kind of flip momentum back in your favor and how that can happen very, very quickly. So, it's something that the Brewers are, it may not be their MO, but it's something that they're going to need to continue to do enough in the right moments if they're going to move on further in the playoffs here. So it's good to see them do it enough in this first round. And it's something that, they're going to have some big swings against the Dodgers as they get into the NLCS, which we will preview very quickly now. We'll look at the pitching matchups first. Game 1, we know that Blake Snell is starting for the Dodgers, and that's kind of it. We know that for the Brewers, it's most likely, based on what Pat Murphy said during the workout day, it's most likely going to be Quinn Priester or Jose Quintana as the bulk guy, and then there's probably going to be an opener pitching in front of them to get the matchups against, like Freddie Freeman and Ohtani and some of those guys. Game 2, it's going to be Yamamoto pitching for LA, and then Freddie Peralta is going to get the ball. Remember, because Peralta pitched in Game 4, the earliest that he could come back on normal rest was for Game 2. So that's when the Brewers are going to roll him out. And then Game 3, Michael asked us who gets the ball in Game 3. Well, right now we don't know. It's TBD versus TBD. Probably looking at Tyler Glasnow or Shohei Ohtani or one of those guys. And then for the Brewers, it's kind of anyone's guess. I would have to think that Jacob Mizorowski is going to be heavily involved, though.
I think he, if not, a true start, maybe with an opener, just because it's been working so well in the playoffs for him to come out of the bullpen and give you the 4 innings or 3 innings. Yeah, I would imagine Game 3 or 4, he's going to be involved in the bulk of the game for sure.
That also does kind of bring us to another question. So, C. Paul Martin on Twitter asked, will the Brewers run out of pitching in the next series? And, it might get a little dicey here in a 7-gamer. I think they're not going to have the ability to do some things that they did in a 5-gamer. I think what complicates this so much is, number 1, Woodruff's down, and number 2, like, how much can you actually trust Jose Quintana? If Quintana was someone who could at least seem a little more comfortable living in the strike zone, I think that would change the calculus a lot and the comfort level a lot. But I think they're in a spot where they got to be pretty strategic with how they use him. The way they used him in the NLDS was perfect. Like, we had talked about this before. That was exactly what he should be on the roster for in that 5-game series. Come in when you're down by several runs. Hey, we just need you. We know that, you're not going to be phased by the moment and that, it's not a huge moment, but we know you can go out there and pitch. And even if you give up more runs, at least you're soaking up some outs for us. And that was exactly how they used him behind Priester in the NLDS after he struggled early. I would guess in the NLCS, it might need to be a little bit more expanded role than that. We'll see how it all kind of shakes out, but they're going to have some interesting decisions to make. And a lot of it, I think, is also going to come down to what are you going to get out of guys like DL Hall and Tobias Myers. So Pat Murphy did say that because it's a 7-game series with 2 off days, including a stretch of 3 games in 3 days in LA, they're going to be more focused in this round on guys who can provide length as opposed to maybe always the highest upside guy. Upside was a big reason why DL Hall and Tobias Myers did not make the roster. Now you flip it to a 7-game series, and they're probably very much in contention because they can give you a little more length. And I think those guys are going to be very big now because what are you getting out of them? Because they are wild cards. They had good surface level results out of the bullpen this year, but neither one of them really missed bats a lot. Walk rate, especially for Hall, was not good. You know, what are you going to get out of these guys? Are they going to, you know, not do so well because there's no swing and miss and the stuff might not profile great? Or are they going to find an extra gear? Is Tobias Myers going to come out throwing 95 and 96 like he did in his only playoff appearance last year? Like what are you getting out of those guys? And I think that's going to play a really big role in answering the question, will the Brewers run out of pitching? Because if Myers and Hall can pitch 3 innings a pop and look really good doing it, no, I don't think they're going to run out of pitching. If those guys just end up looking completely unusable in those games against a very good Dodgers lineup, yeah, that massively changes kind of what your outlook is because, you know, you go from counting on those guys giving you multiple to can we even trust these guys? And that's a huge swing.
Yeah, and the fact that it sounds like they're going to stick with 14 position players and 12 pitchers, they definitely have to focus on these guys who can give you length. And I would imagine that means specifically Grant Anderson is likely off of the CS roster if I were going to guess among the DS pitchers who made the roster. I don't know what the other if they were to keep Myers and Hall. I mean, we talked about Gasser could be a guy who gets replaced. But who would be the I haven't thought about it, but who would be the other shorter inning guy? Like, is it Mears? Like, who's next on that list?
Yeah, I mean it. Mears complicated this by actually looking pretty good in the NLDS. He looked better than I thought he was going to, and he got better
Yeah.
swings than I thought he was going to. So that kind of, you know, I was very on the fence about him before, and now it's like, well, he looked pretty good. Um, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to kind of see the way that they roll that out because yeah, from there a lot of the short range guys are guys who you want to pitch leverage. So you know,
Yeah.
maybe it is Mears. I'm not quite sure. It's going to be tricky. And then like the other thing that I keep thinking of is where do you make room for Rob Z in this equation? Because do you want another short range lefty if you have like a big matchup in the middle innings with Otani or Freeman and you want a lefty in Rob? I don't think people realize how much swing and miss Rob Z gets. He's very, very deceptive. And, you know, he's not a great command guy himself, but he gets a lot of swing and miss. His whiff rate this year is over 30%. So over a third of the swings he's gotten this year in the big leagues have been swings and misses. And we just talked about, like, you need that in the playoffs in big moments. So there's some moving parts here. And I I don't know if I have any great answers right now for how that's all going to come together.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, I think by the time people are hearing this, we probably will have that answer because this is coming out on Monday and the roster is going to come out on Monday and we will find out. But I think that's the question. Like that's who are they going to replace? I do think Anderson's the most likely, almost certainty. But after that, I think it gets a lot more difficult, and you have to decide if it might just be those two for Gasser and Anderson, and who knows? But they might want to keep Gasser because he fits the bill of being someone who can give you longer outings. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see the way they go. I would not have been shocked if they went 13-13, but it sounds like they're not going to. I think my argument would be Isaac Collins had one at bat. I don't think Churio's playing center at any point in the playoffs. To me, Isaac Collins gave a ton this season. I like Isaac Collins. To me, he's the one that I would keep 13-13, and I would probably take Collins off of the roster. And I think that would be tough. And I think it would be unfortunate for Collins, but that's how I would make it work personally. It just doesn't sound like that's how they're going to go about it.
Yeah, it seems like based on what Murphy said that they're probably going to stick with the 14 and 12. Yeah, we're going to see how it all comes together. Ken did ask a question about Rhys Hoskins. hypothetically, would Rhys Hoskins be left off the Dodgers roster, or would he be better than some of their bench guys or pinch hitters? Spencer, you've got a note next to this one, so I can let you take it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at their NLDS roster and kind of looking at the guys who would at least be semi-fringe. I think some of these are pretty clearly making their roster no matter what, but I think you'd be basically assuming they keep the same number of position guys as they did for the DS. You'd be choosing between Rhys, Justin Dean, Tommy Edman, Kike Hernandez, Haesung Kim, Dalton Rushing, and Miguel Rojas. They kept 3 catchers technically for the DS. That makes me wonder if maybe they would keep him over a guy like Rushing. Now, in terms of actual pinch hitting, who you'd want to hit, I think you'd want him over a lot of these guys if you were the Dodgers. But in terms of putting them in the field, having guys who can play, like a lot of these guys can play a lot of different positions. And I think the Dodgers like having that on their bench. So I don't know. It's possible he'd be a case of similar to what he is with the Brewers, just like a tough roster crunch. But it is interesting. Like, it shows how different, like, I don't think anyone would argue that the Dodgers have less talent than the Brewers. But I think you could easily argue that Rhys has a more deserving spot on the Dodgers roster in the playoffs than the Brewers. And that's just kind of how the builds of rosters can be different. And it doesn't really necessarily always equal the most talented player or the best player when you're making these decisions. It's about how everything fits together. So Dean's kind of their outfield guy who played a lot of center at the end of games when I was watching. He's not getting left off. My guess is it would be Rushing, Rojas, or Kim. I didn't really see Kim play in the games I watched. Maybe he was playing more than I thought. And they love Rojas in LA, so my guess is they wouldn't keep him off the roster, and he's had some playoff moments. But yeah, I mean, I'm probably reading too much into it and thinking too much about it, honestly. But it's interesting because, like I said, I think there's no argument. People would not argue at all that the Brewers have more talent than the Dodgers. But again, I think there might be a better fit for him on a playoff roster for them than for the Brewers. And that's, to me, that's just more interesting about how these things happen.
So we didn't really take a whole lot of time to profile the Dodgers, but just to kind of give a snapshot, offensively, they're a little better than the Cubs. Pitching wise, they're probably a little bit worse. Defensively, they're not the Cubs, but they graded out very well defensively too in their own right this year. So it's kind of a similar situation there. Um, I think the Brewers probably have a better potential of like just making things happen against them than I thought they did against the Cubs. So there is that. A lot of it, I think, is going to be like, can this Brewers pitching be up to the task against some very, very good hitters? And the Dodgers, that they have had some high
Yeah.
scoring games in the playoffs so far, but we also saw in the series against the Phillies, there were very good Phillies pitchers who were able to shut them down. So, there is a blueprint to make it happen. Um, but again, it's another tough matchup for the Brewers. I don't know if it's quite as tough as I thought the Cubs would be, though. And I think a lot of it comes down to like this Dodgers team just feels to me like a team that you can get them spinning their wheels more easily than you can do with the Cubs. But again, that didn't
Yeah.
necessarily play out how I thought either because the Brewers just, completely dominated the Cubs in the first 2 games of the series. So, but that's just my 2 cents. I think their bullpen is still very, very vulnerable too. That's a big part of this. Sasaki has looked amazing at the back end, and he's kind of brought just any form of stability to a bullpen that was lacking it.
Yeah.
But all the guys behind him, there's still, I mean, it's basically what Sasaki and Alex Vesia, and everything else is a wild west out there. So it's
Yeah.
it. I think you can take advantage of that, and I think the Brewers are equipped to do something like that, especially if they go up there in the late innings and they work a couple walks or they kind of grind out some long at bats and get those wheels turning. I think it's got a better chance to work against this team than I thought it did against the Cubs. So Last series I predicted that the Cubs would take it in 5. I'm going to go a little bit more optimistic this time. I'm going to say Brewers in 6.
Wow. You're going to be more optimistic than I am on the prediction. That's wild. I am actually, I'm not going to pick against the Brewers. I'm just going to say Brewers in 7. I agree with everything you said. I think the one thing you didn't talk about, and I think like matchup wise, I do think this is a better pure matchup in terms of what the Brewers do well versus what the Dodgers don't do well necessarily than what we had with the Cubs series. But while the Cubs have good players like Michael Busch, Kyle Tucker's not what Kyle Tucker can be currently due to his injuries, and are game breakers on the Dodgers that the Cubs didn't have. And nobody that you fear like Shohei Ohtani, who can flip a game completely, and not can flip a game, but you almost expect to when he comes up to the plate. Freddie Freeman, who's done it a lot and also done it in the playoffs a lot over the course of his career. Like those types of guys can swing series, can swing games a little bit differently than I think anyone on the Cubs could. So while I agree that like the matchup itself, I like better for the Brewers for everything you laid out. I have nothing against that. I agree with everything you said. But I do think superstar talent can swing games, and they have those guys. Like they have them. You also have the Blake Snell type who one in this playoff has actually gone deeper than he had at any other point in his career. So he's shown that he has a different level to what he can do, because he's always been a great pitcher, but he's never gone say Peralta. He throws a lot of pitches to get not a ton of outs, but he gets the outs and he doesn't give up a ton of runs in the process usually. But he has shown that he can go a little bit deeper, so they've got a really good guy there. We know Yamamoto. The Brewers did well against him this year in their opportunity, but he's a very good pitcher. Glass now has good stuff, and he's done well in the playoffs. And then Shohei's a disgusting pitcher. It's just he hasn't done it a ton this year, and you never quite know what you're going to get out of him. But like that's a more intimidating top 4. So I'm still going Brewers in 7 because I do think a lot of the stuff matches up well, but they scare me a little bit more than the Cubs generally just because of the star power and how those guys can. Not only that, but they have some experience there. They just won. They've got guys who've done this before and have the star power. Like those are always going to worry me. Nobody's going to scare me more than Shohei when he steps up to the plate, other than maybe Aaron Judge. So like that part of the equation, I think, is why I'm not quite as confident as you are, and I can't believe I'm at that point. But yeah, that I'm going Brewers in 7, but that's the logic behind it.
Well, we're going to find out what happens. It's going to be an eventful week of baseball, no matter what the outcome is. And we got to decide how we're going to approach it. I think we'll kind of see how the first couple games of the series goes. Given that it's a 7-gamer, we might be able to split this one up down the middle, depending on where the series lies.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you on that, though. But we're going to have, obviously, in-depth recaps of everything that goes on here in the NLCS as the Brewers look to continue what they've been hoping for years now would be a march to the World Series. There's going to be a lot going on, and emotions, I would imagine, will be high. I'm sure tensions will be high for Spencer. I'm looking forward to covering this, though. I think it's going to be certainly a very entertaining stretch of ball here. And like I said, we'll be back with you at some point to recap everything that goes down in the next several days here. So thank you for listening to the Brewer Fanatic podcast, and we'll be back to break down some big results next time.